Darrell Gwaltney, how are you? Welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
Glad you are here.
I'm doing well. Thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good. Let's see. You are a New Testament scholar, former pastor, former dean. Now you are running a couple of studies for Lilly Foundation on preaching and all of that. So let's continue and invite our friends into a conversation that you and I often have about training of ministers and how that's shaping in the new challenges we're facing in the church. Both of us are very committed to the local church and spent a long time thinking about the challenges of the local church. All right, let's go back to the basics. Let's not assume anything.
Sure.
Do ministers need to be trained?
Yes.
Okay, you want to expound on that, or
sure.
we just going to
well,
go with
I think there's, in the first place, if we're biblical, we are the place in the Scripture which I think call us to be trained and show us. Jesus gathered disciples around him. He trained them, showed them how to do that. We find lots of examples in the New Testament, primarily Paul and Timothy, and Titus, but many other places, John Mark, Barnabas, Silas, where leaders gathered other people around them and they showed them how to do ministry. So I think it's a biblical example for that. I think practically, though, I'm very well aware that here I am, in the kind of the sunset years of my ministry career, almost 50 years of ministry. I remember people early on who poured into me.
Right.
Pastors in my local churches who encouraged me, called me into ministry, supported me, gave me opportunities to preach and teach, even when I had no idea what I was doing.
Can we stop just right now and thank God for all those churches that listened to bad sermons?
Oh yes,
from the first time you preach.
One of my favorite preaching stories is the very first sermon I preached on salt and light text in Matthew 5:13 and 16. As I preached it, I was just 18 years old, 22 minutes at Pilgrim's Rest Baptist Church in Ware, Missouri, a church I had grown up in. I came down and people were shaking my hands. And Mrs. Stone, former school teacher, comes up to me. She was well into retirement years, and she did the double handshake where she and then, which means you don't get away.
That's right. Yeah,
you're going to hear what I say. She looked at me and she said, "Brother Darrell, it's okay. You'll do better next time." Now, that was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. She taught me something that every time that I preach, I can do better. I can grow on that. But beyond examples like that, I am deeply indebted to professors that I had both in college and in seminary and grad school. And I'm indebted by just yesterday, I had an exchange with a former student of mine. I know of a church that needs a pastor, so I reached out to this student and I said, "Are you ready for a change?" And the student said, "Actually, I just accepted a call at this church in Virginia, so I can't do that." And so we had this moment where the student was sharing with me, and the student graduated a dozen years ago. And we had this small little Cardinal Cub connection. And at graduation, she gave me a Cubs hat, and I gave her a little stuffed Cardinal. She's a Cubs fan. I'm a Cardinals fan.
Bitter enemies.
So I told her, I showed the student, I said, "Look what's hanging on my wall, your Cubs hat." And the student said, "Look what's on my bookshelf, little Cardinal." And so, the value of teaching isn't measured necessarily by grades. It's measured by the investment in the lives of people. And it's measured by people taking a chance on you and talking to you. So I think definitely training is critical.
You've made an interesting transition in the course of my question is it important to be trained? And now you started talking about the joy of doing the training the joy of investment. So let's follow that.
Sure.
One of the core teachings of the ECN is that now, more than being a CEO and running all the administrative things of the church and being a good leader in that kind of way, that pastors have to commit themselves to the training, the identification and training of the next generation of leaders.
Right.
Okay. And so you switched from the people who invested in you to the continual payoff and joy of having invested in someone else and see them succeed. Okay, so talk to me now about, because this is going to get into a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about today, about the challenges of the new church, of what's going on in America right now. What is it about the calling to pastor a church that demands, one of the aspects of that, and it's often overlooked, is the identification and training of the next generation of leaders, and how important it is to walk around with your spiritual radar on so you can point out to the people going, you need to pay attention to your life. God's up to something. I can remember 3 or 4 deacons in my little Mill Village church in Huntsville, Alabama, literally walked up to me, pointed at me and said, pay attention to your life. I've never forgotten that quote. Pay attention to your life, Michael.
Right.
God is up to something. And I was 10, 12 years old.
Right.
And these people were seeing it before I did.
Well, I think that, I chose the word investment because I think it's a decision that we make. Jesus discipled and called disciples to disciple. So I think we're called to disciple. And that means investing in relationships. And so, for example, in my time as Dean of Religion at Belmont University, almost 20 years of that, I don't know the exact number, but I had somewhere between 500 and 600 students that were religion majors over those nearly 20 years. Not all of them continued on into what we would consider classic pastoral ministry in a church. A good many of them did. Some went on into other kind of ministry positions. Some are not active in the church, not active in ministry in the church. It might be in a community. Some maybe have moved away from faith a little bit, which is part of the journey of life for people.
Right.
But I can, out of that, 500 plus, I've stayed in touch with many of them. And that's a part of what I feel my responsibility is. If I invest in them, I would always say to them, I'm here for you for as long as I'm here. It's not about me being your dean or your professor. It's about me believing in you and wanting to be available to you. So I mentioned the conversation I had yesterday with a former student. Just the day before yesterday, I spent an hour and a half talking to a former student, a coaching conversation, and both laughing that this former student is now almost 40. And I met him when he was 17. So for 23 years, years, I've been following this.
And some of the most formative years.
Right, exactly. Encouraging him, leading him. And so I think that, it's about our taking the initiative to do that. I don't know that you have to be a pastor to do that. I think that to be a follower of Jesus, to encourage and equip other believers is what we always do, to recognize people who have leadership ability and to try to help encourage them to discover that, give them opportunities to explore it, is part of what we do as ministry leaders.
You spend a lot of time with pastors. I spend a lot of time with pastors. What they are being asked to do and demanded of them in the local church, and what you and I experienced so long ago when we were in our first churches, is very, very different now. How have you noticed that difference?
I remember, how long was this? This would be almost 30 years ago now, when I was pastoring at that time. And the reason I located it 30 years ago, it was about the time when PowerPoint began to kind of be developed. And so
when the plague of PowerPoint was released on the world.
There was expectation because you had personal computers. There was kind of a developing expectation that in your sermons you would use some sort of like visuals or even media, sound, and that. But your sermon would be not just vocal, but it would have this sort of like visual, multi-sensory kind of experience. And I sort of enjoyed doing that, and I experimented with it, and saw both the limits and the benefits of it. And the social media revolution doesn't even compare to PowerPoint. I mean, PowerPoint doesn't compare to that. I mean, I think since 2010, maybe the last 15, 16 years, with the advent of phones and tablets and broadband and the consequent apps like Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and the litany of them. I think now that when you and I were starting to preach, they would tell us, "Oh, people are watching a TV show that's 30 minutes long. About 23 minutes, that's all they're going to attention. Right. You got 23 minutes. You get about like 7 minutes, and they get a commercial break. So you got to design your sermon around that.
That's right.
Now people's attention span is much briefer than that, and it's not even like it's not 7 minutes, but it's not even about that. It's the fact that they hold the distraction in their hand.
Right.
And people have been trained by that. So I think one of the challenges for pastors today in preaching is the communication process is much more complex, and then for us to mix into that, layer into it, if you would, as if you were making some kind of a multi-layer cake, is the challenges in our culture. Secularism, what we're now really speaking openly about is Christian nationalism, some sort of creation, some sort of expression of Christianity that doesn't feel right. Other religions. And so all of those things are there in ways that they weren't. At least I wasn't aware of them when I was starting out.
Well, with the social media and the change of our communities and all, the things that used to be far away are now immediate.
Exactly.
See, I tell folks, when I was growing up, if you wanted to do something bad, you had to go to the other side of town, and half the fun was getting to the other side of town and back without being seen by one of your parents' friends, who would rat you out in a minute because they knew he was on the other side of town. There's no good reason to go to the other side of town, so he's in trouble for something.
My mom would say to me, "I don't want to hear you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be."
Exactly right.
It was real simple.
Exactly right.
I don't want to hear that you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be. So I knew what that meant. There were people watching me.
Oh yeah, rat you out in a minute. But now with social media, the thing of I had to be ready at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. That was the whole job.
Right.
Do what you have to do, but be ready on Sunday morning. Now the conversation is 24/7, and your church expects you to be part of the faith conversation, talking to them about how you live out this faith with the problems that they are facing.
Right.
24/7 every week.
Well, I think that, and I think that's challenged as well by the fact that when you and I 30 years ago, 40 years ago, would stand up to preach, our people were in dialogue with us. And the dialogue that we created for them with Scripture. So weekly we would gather. We felt the responsibility to be good interpreters of the text and to find a way to share it with their congregation that would be meaningful to them, memorable, and would be effective for helping them grow in discipleship. That was our key task. Well, now I think what a challenge that pastors face is that there's a lot of other people in the room.
A lot of other seats at that board of directors.
Exactly. There's a lot of other people breathing in that conversation. And so when that pastor stands up there to preach on any given Sunday now, stands up there to preach, if they're thoughtful, and they are trying to be aware of the other kinds of conversations. Interestingly enough, we're honest about calling them influencers.
Mm-hmm.
People develop a persona to influence other people. And so now pastors, when they stand up on any time to preach or teach, are aware of influencers. And people in the congregation are being influenced. Mm-hmm. So there are other voices interpreting that text, interpreting the discipleship that they're being called mm-hmm. to live into at that moment. It's exciting in one way,
right?
Because you have to really work hard.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that a pastor needs to accept as a reality and work into that.
And be very careful with, because you and I know folks who, one bad tweet or podcast and blog, and there goes the career. Mm-hmm. There goes the opportunity to do the ministry.
Yeah.
Now you intersect with Christianity in America at a lot of different levels. You're a researcher, New Testament scholar, pastor, all of that. You taught pastors coming up. So what are the changes you've noticed?
In my teaching environments?
Well, yeah, and the line I'm trying to pull is, okay, you went, you were pastoring in Florida, came up here to be the dean of school of Belmont, and so you pull that thread of what you had in the pulpit. Now you're dealing with folks who are coming to you going, hey, I feel called to the ministry now. I want to be trained to the ministry. And you did that for 20 years. So how did those folks change? I mean, one of the things that we talked about is you don't have many people now who want to pastor a church. Right. They want the same degree that you and I have, but they want to do it in some kind of nonprofit expression outside the church.
So there's a couple of ways I could answer that. Mm-hmm. A couple of different directions I could go. Let me try to build a response for you. Part of it is personal. I grew up in rural Missouri. I went to Baptist churches. Mm-hmm. I went to a Baptist college. I went to a Baptist seminary. I went to a Baptist graduate school. I went to a school, my first teaching assignment was a school that was Baptist.
Yeah, is your therapist helping you work through all this?
Yeah. So I was in that community of faith.
Mm-hmm. Same story.
And I did my dissertation on a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest, and I remember not telling my mother for a long time who I was studying because I was concerned that she would think that I had lost my faith. Right, yeah. Okay, so I grew up in that kind of an environment, and when I was in Florida, and I taught at college for a while, and then I began pastoring a church, and when I began pastoring that church in Palm Beach County, Florida, I realized I was in a different world than what I grew up in rural Missouri, mm-hmm. and that there were people who didn't have my kind of cultural connections. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just about diversity, racially or diversity, economically. It was about people that had different religious experiences, worldviews, mm-hmm. or no religion, mm-hmm. and I found myself needing to really think through. What am I really trying to proclaim here? Mm-hmm. I'm not talking to the people who have already accepted this. I'm trying to find a way to communicate to them. And so that was a real turning point for me.
All right, good point. Let's underline this.
Yeah.
You and I started, and a lot of my career was spent preaching and leading a church where the gospel was reinforced in their community.
Right.
Okay. For instance, in my home, both my parents were deeply religious. They knew all of my school teachers, mm-hmm. who, if they didn't go to our church, went to another church, Baptist, Methodist, occasional Episcopalian, something mm-hmm. like that. Yeah. But they all had that basic Christian worldview.
Right.
And even if you didn't believe it, you knew the stories of the Bible because you had grown up with them or whatever.
Right.
Now, the conversations with the people who have no context, no background, and one of the things that I tell preachers, you probably do too, when you refer to another story in the Bible, don't assume that your congregation knows that story.
Right.
So when you say, well, you remember Jonah, they don't.
Yeah.
You've got to go back and explain Jonah.
Yes.
So now we're in a culture, so it pushes you back going, okay, it's not being reinforced anywhere. So why do I believe what I believe? And why do I preach this? And then understanding those foundations, how do I get this across to people with no foundations?
Right. Yeah. So a story that I often refer to about that time. This is almost 40 years ago. When I was pastor at church in Palm Beach County, and after service one day, a young man comes up to me and he says, I introduced myself. When I went up to him, I introduced myself to him and said, "Good to have you here today. It's your first visit." He said, "No, this is the 5th time I've been here." And I was like, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm just now meeting you." He said, "No, this is the first time I've come in the room." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Well, the first time I came, I pulled up on the parking lot. I'd never been to church. I don't know what this is all about, but I felt like I should go to church. So I pulled up in the parking lot and I saw all these people. I was like, oh, I can't do that. And I drove away.
Right.
So the second time I came up, I got out of my car. I made it halfway across the parking lot. People started coming out of the building and said, oh, I can't do that. I went back to my car. The third time I came here, I made it in the building and somebody said hi to me, started asking me what church I went to, my family, and I was like, I just did the best I could and I left. The fourth time I came in and I stood outside the door and I wanted to watch what was going on. I was like, I don't know what they're doing in there. I don't know if I can do that. I left. So the day I came in, I stayed. And I said, so what was it like? He said, I had no clue what was going on in here. And I said, okay, you come back. My responsibility is to help this make sense of this for you. And so he came and he continued. And at some point in the future, I had the privilege of baptizing him and he came to know Christ. But it was a real, and I have a lot of stories like that from Florida. And since then, that this was a person who was curious about the gospel. There was something in his heart. He was looking for something. And he courageously kept coming until he could be in that conversation. When I came to Nashville as a dean of religion at Belmont, that was really informing my experience a lot. As what's this next generation of believers like? And not long after I came, Belmont moved away from its exclusive Baptist identity and focused on being ecumenical. And now, nearly 20 years later, Belmont has stayed true to that. It's a strong Christian university, and it's ecumenical. And I would sometimes tell students that we do messy Christianity around here because we don't all look at it the same way.
Yeah.
But what I began to see with these students as they would come in over the years, and particularly as we began to attract more and more students who came to Belmont who were from other traditions than were Baptist, that they brought with them their own community expectations. They brought with them their own sense of what it meant to be called into ministry. And one of the things I began to learn was that as a Baptist, I had a real clear sense in my own experience, if I was calling somebody to ministry, and you probably did this too.
Right.
I stand at the end of the worship service. Do you want to come to know Jesus? Do you want to join the church? Or you want to commit to full-time Christian service?
Full-time Christian service, yes.
Full-time Christian service meant, do you want to be a pastor or a youth pastor or a missionary?
Right.
I mean, when I was growing up, that's what that meant. By the time I'm talking with these students in Belmont, when I come here in 2004, and I'm meeting them from all over the church, their sense of vocation, for some of them, it meant to be a pastor or a youth pastor. Missions. Some of them meant to work in the community, to do nonprofit work. Some meant to be a musician. And I had to begin to think really about what is ministry about?
Right.
Like, what is it? And how can
I'm going to take a secular job to make money so I can do.
Right.
So 2 months out of the year, I can take off and go work in Haiti.
Yeah. I have a student in my mind right now that we had a degree that allowed students to put ministry and business together. And the student did that. And the student worked in a local, food business type business here in Nashville. And then when graduated, the student went to Atlanta and did a franchise for them, but's been very active in ministry. So I think I learned that, and I think what's really important for us to learn is that the sense of what it means to be called into might be different than it was 40 years ago. Some of that is the fact that I grew up in rural Baptist churches where you had a pastor and maybe a part-time music minister. And now Brentwood Baptist Church, oh my goodness, multiple pastors. One of the pastor group I worked with is with pastors at high-capacity churches. Many of these pastors have many people in their staff, people called to do ministry in pastoral ways, many different formats. So I think it's always encouraging for us or helpful for us to be listening to students, listening to others about how they understand God's at work in their life and training them for that.
Now it's not unusual for someone to show up to want a major in religion without having that foundation that you and I came in.
Oh, yeah.
They're actually coming to find that foundation and establish it through their coursework and through their schoolwork.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I was a student in college, I remember sitting in my New Testament, my Old Testament classes and thinking, oh man, I don't know anything about the Bible. And I grew up in churches where I went Bible study all the time, and I knew a fair bit, but I didn't think I knew it. As I work with students, I found just not a lack of knowledge really about the Scripture, not a lack of interest.
No.
There's a difference.
No, that's right.
So I think you can, if somebody doesn't know Scripture, you can say, well, you don't really, no, they're interested. They just haven't had the opportunity to learn. They haven't been as immersed in a biblical culture as I was when I was growing up, or perhaps you were growing up. And so that becomes the exciting thing about teaching them how to read Scripture, introducing Scripture to them, and to own it for themselves.
I had a young person tell me one time that they went to Lifeway, when Lifeway still had stores, to buy a Bible. And I said, great, which one did you buy? And they said, oh, I didn't buy one. I said, why? Have you been over there, Mike? There are thousands. I said, yeah. I said, but I said, no, I didn't want to get the wrong one. I was going to come back and talk to you.
Yeah, so that's a whole, there's a whole other conversation about when you have somebody, whether it's a college student or a person who's interested in ministry. And, some of the work that we've done in Engaged Church Network and School of Ministry is trying to help equip and support people who are interested in ministry. And so often it's like, I don't want to get it wrong. Like I can't tell you how many times, as I've taught preaching to students over the years, I don't want to get it wrong if I say the wrong thing.
Right.
And that's usually when I tell the Mrs. Stone story. You should know a thing or two about Scripture. I should know a thing or two about it, but we've been doing it for decades.
Right.
And there have been plenty of times where we've stood up and spoken. I know this is the case for me, perhaps for you too. And afterwards I was like, I didn't do that quite right. I can't do that.
That never happened to me.
I got to do that better next time. And so I think, when we're working with people who are exploring ministry, either they want to be a pastor or they're a college student or a seminary student, I really think it's okay to say, yeah, it's all right if you don't understand it. Yeah, you got that wrong. What led you to make that decision? And how can we be better informed next time?
Yeah. All right, I want to ask one of our favorite questions, but I want to ask it a different way.
Sure.
All the changes that you see, what excites you about these changes and opportunities and challenges?
It makes us take it all more seriously. it makes us realize, like I grew up in a culture where it was the churches were growing and people decided to go to church because it was kind of the cultural thing to do. And in my little bubble, people go to church, you grow a church and, people would always come, you do high attendance days, people would show up for those. And it wasn't easy. It was like you had a system you could work at. We can't take anything for granted now except one thing. It's an emotional thing for me because it's so powerful. And that is that the gospel's powerful and effective to salvation. Romans 1, Paul writes that to the early church. The gospel is powerful and effective. And across the ages, across cultures, this is not the first time that a culture has been upended by non-Christian secular ideas, politically oriented, economically oriented, whatever it is. It's not the first time. We can look over across the ages and see times when the church all over the world was challenged. But it was the people that hung on to the gospel, that powerful message of Jesus Christ, that every person should be loved, every person matters, every person can be redeemed. And if we believe that and realize and accept it, that it's powerful and effective, nothing can stop us. No reason to put away, no way to throw the bat and glove in the back and give up, no reason to walk away. Because the gospel is about something larger than each and every one of us. It's part of the why, like, here at this stage in my life, doing the work that I do now, working with young preachers and other pastors, because I believe in the power of the gospel.
That's right. Yeah. I tell people there's never been a better time.
Never been a better time
to preach than right now.
No, I in Florida again, I had this guy visiting my home. We have these experiences. Like where we are in this season of our life, it's because 10, 20, 30 years ago, something happened. God, an opportunity came up and we were trying to be faithful and God taught us something. And so a learning experience for me, I was in Florida as pastor and I went to this guy's home and they had been coming, he and his girlfriend had been coming to church. So they finally allowed me to come to the home.
You're sitting in the living room with this guy who doesn't believe.
Right.
In fact, wanted to turn you off, wanted to push you away.
Yeah.
But the conversation began with his questions.
Right.
Now, one of the interesting things that's happened in our 40 years or whatever of doing this is we went to the sermon, we walked up to the pulpit knowing we had the answers.
Right.
Okay? Now, to be an effective pastor, you have to walk into the pulpit knowing you have understood their questions.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, and I would frame that even a little bit more precisely, that in the past, we knew the questions they were asking.
Yes.
Or so we thought. And so it was about supporting a way of talking about the Bible, about church that we had been a part of and we knew what they were asking.
Right.
And I think the difference now is for us to be willing to accept that people are asking questions we are not asking.
Right.
And to be willing to create space for them to ask that question.
And begin the conversation where they are.
Right. And to think about what it's like, so preaching is about conversation.
Right.
That's the word for preaching comes from conversation. And so to really ask ourselves and be honest with ourselves that the things that we're really interested in talking about probably don't make a difference to them. I mean, really.
Yeah.
However clever our illustrations are, our terms are this deep, like work in the text. It is not where they are.
Doesn't help.
They're worried about. They've got things in their mind, really, relationship and finances and family and what their kids are doing and the way the world is encroaching upon them. And how does this even matter? Like,
right.
I think I came from a background that, of course, the Scripture is right. Yes, it's truthful.
Right.
Now, let me tell you how it is, so you'll accept it.
Yeah. So adjust accordingly.
But the big question now for people, if they're not already in the church, is, tell me a reason I should believe this.
Where's the foundation I can build my house?
Yeah. How's this true? Mm-hmm. What is the gospel? Mm-hmm. What a funny sounding word.
And how do you know it's true? What makes it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the key thing is for us to slow everything down and listen to questions that people are being asked, mm-hmm. even if the questions that they are asking us indict us in some way. Mm. That the question that somebody might ask us reflects our own bias, our own prejudice, our own insensitivity.
And failures.
Yeah.
And
that's a hard thing when it happens. Mm-hmm. But it's an honest thing for them to do. And it's our responsibility to respond, because more than one time, Jesus was asked very difficult questions. Mm-hmm. So I think we should be as well. He told me right away, he said, I had a T-shirt. He was wearing this T-shirt that had some profanity on it. And he said, I wanted to wear this to church, but she wouldn't let me. She made me wear a different shirt. I said, oh, okay. And then he had placed something up on the TV that was kind of meant to offend me. And he said, what do you think about that? And I was like, I understand what that is. Mm-hmm. So then he began to tell me, he said, I don't believe any of this. And I won't use the language he used, but I don't believe any of this, mm-hmm. and this, And I said, well, okay, that's great. And he said, what do you mean that's great? And I said, we got something to talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
And so how did it happen that you decided to feel that way about this? So we began this conversation. And I sat with him for, I don't know, a while, mm-hmm. So, okay, here's the challenge. Here's the deal. And he said, what? I said, okay, you come to church. You keep coming. You can sit there. Please don't wear that T-shirt. But you can come because it'll distract people. But you come. And my job is to explain this to you.
Yeah.
To present it to you in a way that it will start to make sense. He said, all right, I'll give it a try. And so he did that. And I said, the only thing I ask of you is that sometime in the future, when it's starting to make sense, let's not make a big deal out of it. You just come up and grab my shoulder and lean over in my ear and say, hey, Darrell, this is starting to make sense. We need to talk some more about mm-hmm. it. And so, of course, that happened.
Yeah, sure.
But it was a person who was very negative and working to be offensive to me. But I believed that the gospel had power to reach him. And it did.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Doesn't get better. Yeah. Doesn't get better. We don't want to leave this podcast until we share the great news that's happening in your life, Grandpa.
Yes. I have another grandchild. For 5 years, I've loved being a grandfather with my grandson, Lucas.
Yeah.
And now my oldest daughter and my son-in-law, Alvaro, have blessed us with a little granddaughter named Olivia. We'll probably call her Olivia.
Well, you're broke. You're broke. You'll have to keep working with the school administrator and all that to pay for all her stuff.
She's 3 weeks old today, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that is good stuff. Darrell, thanks for being with us today.
Mike, thank you. Thanks. Always glad to be in conversation with you for the good work we try to do together. Yeah. It's wonderful to believe that we can love God, love the gospel, and equip other people, and it makes a difference in the lives of people. Yeah. So thanks so much.
Good time.
Appreciate it.